Ever since that banger of an opening song, composed by Bernard Hoffer, hit my TV screens all the way back in the 80s, the Thundercats have been a huge part of my core memory while growing up. To be honest, I got introduced to the franchise through the original animated TV series from 1985 instead of the toys, which I guess was the show's actual function, to be honest. However, I'd later learn on in life that despite this show launching this franchise into the stratosphere and establishing itself as one of the best cartoon shows of that era, not everything was roses and sunshine during its production. So in this video, I've set out to explore everything there is to know about this iconic TV show that came out in 1985 and ran for almost half a decade. From its advent to the controversies surrounding it, the final episodes, and what the future holds for this franchise, there's nothing I won't be covering. To find out the answers to all these questions, join me today as I explore how the Thundercats actually end. Let's begin. How did the Thundercats, 1985 to 1989, begin? The rise. The Thundercats, like most other animated shows of that era, was a byproduct of the massive toy rush that was prevalent during that time. I think it's a well-known fact that the primary goal of the Thundercats animated series was to sell toys and merchandise to their target audience, much like the rest of their contemporaries like He-Man, Masters of the Universe, and Transformers. Tobin Wolfe, fondly known as Ted Wolfe within the industry, who was a well-known character designer at that time, had this brainwave of creating a group of alien humanoid cats set in a fictional world around 1983 to 1984, the result of which was the birth of the Thundercats, though I think it's fair to say at this point the concept was just an idea for a toy. However, as I said, the primary marketing and tactic of that era for toys was to adapt them into television series, and this was a tried and tested formula. So, it was only natural what happened next. I also believe the idea of seeing his creations brought to life on the screen also enticed Ted Wolfe to take the next step, which is why he brought the concept to his buddy Stan Weston, who was the president of Leisure Concepts, a company which was familiar with the idea of packaging and pitching ideas to producers, with their specialty being turning concepts into toys and entertainment properties. As fate would have it, one of the groups that Thundercats were pitched to was the Rankin Bass Productions, and the rest, as they say, is history. Despite being producers, Arthur Rankin Jr. in particular became immersed in Wolfe's creation and immediately gave the project a green light. I think it's nice to see that from the onset, the passion for this franchise didn't just belong to its creators, but also the people who funded it. You can see why this franchise grew to the levels that it did, in my opinion. They immediately hired Leonard Starr as head writer, and soon the world of Thundercats began to take shape, as Starr transformed concepts into myths that generations of fans would soon adore. If you take a look back at Thundercats, even now, I think you can quite easily see that it was quite different, even visually, from its contemporaries like G.I. Joe and the rest. Let me tell you, if you in fact did notice this difference, it was actually because Rankin Bass usually contracted the animations of their show to Japanese animation houses like Topcraft and Pacific Animation Works, who use cell animations, which is the same technique used in your classic animes of the 80s and 90s. I firmly believe that it was one of the things that absolutely contributed to the Thundercats standing out from the crowd and appealing to its young audience. Rankin Bass wanted the resulting animated show to offer moral guidance and teach life lessons to its core viewers, which, as I just mentioned, were mostly young people. Rick Goldschmidt, the renowned chronicler and historian of Rankin Bass, once said in an interview, "To assure these lessons were correct, Rankin Bass retained the services of a psychologist, Dr. Robert Huisis, Ph.D. Clearly, as I just stated earlier, this animation series was more than just a means to sell toys, which is highlighted by the lengths the producers went to in this manner behind the scenes. Thundercats would be released to the masses on January 23, 1985, and would air for a whopping 65 episodes, which would then be followed by a movie and 3 subsequent seasons, taking the world by storm. The cracks form, controversy, and cost. Having just looked at the rise of this iconic franchise, led by the equally stellar animated television series, let's now turn our gaze towards its downfall and the things that led to it. You see, back in the day, from the early 60s to the first half of the 80s, there were some very strict regulations in place in America with regard to advertising to children. I believe it was actually illegal to market anything directly to kids, which rose out of the fear that corporations would target impressionable young children as their new cash cows. Enter President Ronald Reagan, who famously got involved in this controversy as well, when he began to loosen up these regulations without proper planning. Before the 1980s, children's television advertising was under heavy scrutiny from the FCC, FTC, and advocacy groups. The concern was that toy-based cartoons could become program-length commercials. I don't think I need to tell you that this generated the necessary loopholes for these toy companies to begin creating animated TV shows in order to circumvent these regulations and advertise to kids. During the Reagan-era push towards deregulation, broadcasters and toy companies had more room to build shows around merchandise, which helped fuel the explosion of franchises like He-Man, Transformers, G.I. Joe, and Thundercats. This would obviously sit badly with parents groups and watchdog organizations who felt that Reagan's policies were turning a blind eye to greedy corporations targeting children. As demands for new regulations escalated and public sentiment turned sour against companies like Hasbro, the fight just wasn't worth it to keep making Thundercats. I want you to understand that this was at a time when the debate regarding the nature of what kids could watch was at an all-time peak. The Thundercats was in the center of the storm with its legality being questioned, despite it telling stories that had moral messaging in them. And I think it can't be denied that these were essentially advertisements meant to hook children. So there was truth to what the watchdog groups were clamoring about. To compound this mounting public pressure, there was also the question of the money involved in making the show. The very first season of Thundercats ran for a total of 65 episodes, and as I mentioned, the actual animation process was being outsourced to Japan. The point I'm trying to make here is that to maintain this steady state of production, it's not an easy thing to pull off both logistically and financially, which is why from the following season onwards, the number of episodes was 25 and then 20 thereafter until the end. I think we also need to consider how public taste evolves naturally over time, and Thundercats was no longer that hot new thing in town. With the constant public pressure, as I've mentioned earlier, followed by financial constraints and a clear lack of motivation, due to all these things combined, there was no clear justification to continue making the Thundercats animated series, and before anyone knew it, the writing was already on the wall for this iconic TV series. The penultimate blow, the last day. Since this video is all about how things ended for the original Thundercats animated show, I thought it was only fitting to talk about one of its most popular episodes, which also happened to be the end of the third season. I believe that they treated this story as something that could be taken as an ending of the series at the time, because of the turbulent times that the production of this animated show was facing. Anyway, the episode kicks off with Mum-Ra alone in his pyramid, surrounded by the ancient spirits of evil after having been abandoned by both mutants and the Lunatics. Having thus been abandoned by everyone, it becomes apparent that Mum-Ra's days are numbered, which is a sentiment shared by the ancient spirits of evil, and they call him out for it. Despite his posturing, the spirits express their anger, saying that Mum-Ra had failed them year after year, even with their help, and it soon becomes apparent that they too are ready to cut ties with the villainous mummy. To prove their point, they even teleport Mum-Ra's pet Mammoth to some other unknown dimension. They turn their attention back on Mum-Ra and threaten him with a similar fate, should he fail the final chance given by them to him. With that said, they agree to Mum-Ra's request and grant him all of their powers, presenting before us the strongest version of this character that we've ever seen. They do lay a stipulation on him though, saying that if he fails to get rid of the Thundercats before sunset, not only will the villain lose all his powers, but he'll be met with the same fate as his pet. Not far off in the Tower of Omen, the Thundercats are rocked by a massive earthquake, which Panthro quickly deduces to be unnatural in its origins. Lion-O then divides them up to look for the source of these disturbances, which eventually leads them to cross paths with Mum-Ra, who is transformed into a colossus and stands taller than the mountains of Third Earth. The guy's not just massive, but extremely powerful as well. I mean, every time Mum-Ra's strikes crash on the Earth, it creates crevices on the planet's surface and leads to planetary earthquakes. As if that wasn't enough, the force of his blows is so devastating that he triggers multiple volcanic explosions simultaneously, creating one of my favorite visual scenes from that episode. It doesn't take long for Mum-Ra to quickly overpower his adversaries as he sends Panthro, Chitara, and Tigra into the limbo. He then traps Lion-O beneath a river of magma and then proceeds to the Tower of Omens, which he destroys with a single swing of his glaive, following which he sends the twins Wily Cat and Wily Kit into limbo as well. At this point, the victory of evil is all but assured. Unfortunately for Mum-Ra, Lion-O has escaped his infernal prison and confronts him with the Sword of Omens, which has been boosted by the powers of all the other Thundercats trapped within limbo. Meanwhile, Mum-Ra, despite still having the upper hand, is slowly depowering as the end of the day is almost here. With everything at stake, he lunges to strike down the leader of the Thundercats when the sun finally sinks over the horizon. And just like that, his powerful form crumbles and gets blown away by the wind. The ancient spirits then make good on their promise and teleport him away to an unknown place, and the day's finally won, with the threat of Mum-Ra apparently gone forever. My thoughts while watching this episode were that the ancient spirits of evil, despite being ancient and powerful, aren't all that bright, are they? Imagine giving your most powerful servant a time limit to take out your greatest threat, and then taking away his powers just as he's about to execute the thing you tasked him with. I know the plot in these shows was never the strongest, but I had to vent. This thing's been bothering me for years. The episode finally closes with the Thundercats deciding to return to New Thundera to live happily ever after. Or so they thought.
Insert the key.
The final episode, The Book of Omens. While Season 3 gave us that harrowing ending, which seemed to signal the beginning of the end, we would have to wait all the way to the end of the 4th season till we actually got the true ending of the series. One of the reasons why I think we got the Season 3 ending was not just to conclude that season, but also because the creators weren't too certain themselves if they'd be returning for a 4th season, considering the things that were happening. The finale sees the Thundercats' new home of New Thundera being threatened by forces of nature that are tied to supernatural origins, and if Lion-O and his friends don't do something about it, the entire planet will be destroyed. So, naturally, he decides to consult with the Book of Omens, where the Guardian tells him that the only way to save the planet from certain devastation is to place certain powerful artifacts in predetermined locations across Thundera within the next 24 hours. Once they'd done all that, the Thundercats then had to present the Key of Thundera to the Guardian, which would complete the ritual. I don't think I need to tell you guys that things don't really go according to plan for our heroes, because listening to all of this information is Mum-Ra, like the vermin he is, in the form of a scarab beetle. No sooner have both Lion-O and Panthro left the chamber to discuss the plan with the rest of the Thundercats, the villain steals both the key and the book before escaping to his black pyramid. While the remaining Thundercats disperse to place the artifacts in their locations, Lion-O returns to deal with the key, only to find it missing. And, guessing that the evil mummy had something to do with it, he rushes to the villain's hideout. Once there, he confronts Mum-Ra, who, despite the warnings of his masters, the ancient spirits of evil, enters into the Book of Omens. And, seeing no other way, Lion-O follows him inside, hoping to stop the villain once and for all. Once there, he's informed by the Guardian that he must defeat his arch-nemesis in unarmed combat to gain the key, which he does after a long struggle. But that's not the end. I mean, once again, it's no surprise as Mum-Ra, in a desperate bid to win, summons the ancient spirits of evil to send forth their champion, Pyron. This dude proves to be infinitely more of a challenge to Lion-O, but is eventually defeated as well. And with his foes vanquished, the leader of the Thundercats presents the key to the Guardian, completing a ritual to save the planet in the final hour. The turbulent storms and disturbances cease outside as the pockets of disturbances get transformed into peaceful and productive areas, and this time, the Thundercats do live happily ever after. The problem I personally have with this ending, despite meaning that the Thundercats series actually got a real ending, which shows of this era rarely got, is the fact that there's no sense of closure here. I can't imagine why they would leave the fate of Mum-Ra up in the air, as we don't really know what happened to him or the spirits of evil. Pyron is defeated, the ritual is completed, and we're expected to act like everything is fine and dandy. I get that the planet's saved, but this really felt like the end of just another story arc within a season, rather than a true ending. The series was a massive saga that spanned for nearly half a decade, and for it to end like this felt quite unceremonious, at least to me. Once again, considering the fact that the series was already on its last legs due to the reasons I've explained earlier, I'm grateful that we even got an ending, but I think it's only fair to call out the things that need to be called out. What came next? Time would pass in the real world, and the Thundercats, who once dominated not just the toy industry but also children's entertainment, would fade from memory for a long time, until June 2011, when we got to see the series get rebooted under Ethan Spalding and Michael Jelinek for Cartoon Network. The series would continue the American-Japanese collaboration, with Warner Bros. Animation producing it, while the actual animation was done by none other than Studio 4 Degree C, the same guys who've given us hits like Memories, Tech on Concrete, and Animatrix. It was originally intended as a reboot of about 50 episodes, but ended up airing just one season of 26 episodes. When asked to compare the vibes of the series to the original one, Michael Jelinek said, "The old show felt more like a Saturday morning animated series, and this feels more like a movie." I mean, this show is definitely a much darker and mature take on the iconic franchise, which seems to be a sentiment shared by Jelinek as well, who said, "It's definitely darker, but we've put a lot more focus on the characters and the arc. And because of that, we might have a few more sophisticated themes going on in this." Despite the reboot initially catching fire thanks to a wave of nostalgia, it never quite managed to capture the same amount of attention as the original show. The next reboot of the series would get 50 episodes, but would shift the tone in the visuals of the Thundercats so dramatically that it would leave the fanbase divided. I'm talking about the 2020 Thundercats Roar, which went in the opposite direction from the 2011 version by giving us a goofy, cartoonish storyline and visuals. I know there are some people out there who actually like this show, but honestly, this just wasn't it for me. As someone hoping for a series to revitalize this franchise, this seems to have been the sentiment shared by many other fans as well, because the series was canceled immediately after the first season. While the franchise has grown over the years, I'm one of those fans patiently waiting for another awesome animated adventure with the Thundercats. While that might still be a distant dream, recently my hopes, like many of you, have been stirred by the news of Adam Wingard being announced as the director of a potential Thundercats film. When asked about his version, Wingard had this to say: "My version would be 100% the 80s version. I've seen the rebooted anime one, but if I'm honest, the 80s one is just what Thundercats is to me, and that's what I'd be creating. This might just be our best chance to see the Thundercats finally make a comeback, and I am all for it."
Sword of Omens. Give me sight beyond sight.
To end this video, I just want to say most of us who grew up in the late 80s are now the adults filling up the theaters. I can't therefore imagine a better time than now for the Thundercats to capitalize on this and attempt to make a comeback. Although Adam Wingard's film seems to be steadily moving towards production, but starving for decades, I want more Thundercats stuff. For now though, having waited this long, I guess waiting another couple years shouldn't be too hard. However, no matter what show or movie comes out, it'll always be tough to top the Thundercats animated show from the 80s that set all these things in motion. I hope you really enjoyed this video today. For now, it's time for me to say goodbye. I'll see you soon in the next one. Until then, stay safe